This Ukrainian MiG-29 crossed the front line at Kherson at 50 feet at 1,000 hours local time in order to destroy a grain silo that the Russians had converted into a drone command and control center. Even though the mission had been peaceful thus far, everything would change in a matter of seconds. The MiG-29 was unaware that a Russian Igla from a checkpoint just ahead had the aircraft in its line of sight when it fired a missile. The smoke trail cork is messing up. The missile is already in motion. Seeker's engines were locked. The pilot forced an overshoot by yanking the missile hard left and then harder right into its prior trajectory. However, this was only the initial one. Within 4 seconds, 3 more rockets, distinct vectors. In the hopes that being close would make up for it, Russian forces were firing without lock tones. The pilot of the SPO-15 Berezovka radar warner said nothing. These Soviet systems are only capable of detecting radar-guided threats, such as smoke detectors, which are only capable of detecting smoke rather than actual fire. They are unable to detect passive infrared missiles. His only warning as 3 missiles attempted to converge on him at the same time was the increasing smoke plumes. A maximum brake turn was initiated by the pilot. He is being crushed into the seat by 9 Gs. The missiles were unable to match it. All 3 overshot without causing any harm, although those launch plumes just produced enormous smoke signals that could be seen for 20 meters. From this location to Crimea, every Russian position now knew exactly where to search. He threaded above power lines at a ground speed of 540 knots while diving back 50 feet. Warning shouted from the radar altimeter. Although the minimum settings indicated 50 feet, the actual clearance over the ground ranged from 20 to 80 feet. Being a very costly lawn dart was the result of a single instant of inattention. Using topography to disrupt radar line of sight every 8 to 10 seconds, this was Earth's most extreme flying nap. Flying so low that rooftop manpads teams could stare down at him. Power line tunnels ensured there would be no unexpected obstructions. There will be more Iglas launched soon. In an attempt to get him to fly through the missile's acquisition basket, Russians fired over his shoulder and launched behind him. He used 200 pounds of gasoline from his 7,000 pounds of internal capacity for each evasive maneuver. He would be walking home after 35 more difficult twists like that, according to simple calculation. At this low altitude, his plane's navigation equipment was worthless. The only thing preventing him from blending in with the Ukrainian countryside was the waypoints he had committed to memory on his Mark I eyeballs. A P-18 Spoon rest radar was receiving sporadic returns, even though he was winning the bloodiest game of dodgeball in history. This beast from the Vietnam era operates between 150 and 170 MHz in the VHF band. Wavelengths that are more effective than current X-brand radars at penetrating terrain. It's similar to how you can hear your neighbor's music's bass, but not their voice. If he could even survive this next swarm of Iglas, the operator was already warning a Pantsir crew 12 km ahead about the likely course, as he began to discern a pattern in the transient encounters. Both near-IR and mid-IR signatures created especially to withstand flares could be seen by the most recent inbound eyeglass. Only 60 rounds could fit in his 30mm chaff flare dispensers. He'd used 6 previously. The math was becoming more and more difficult. They tried their luck at another checkpoint ahead, but firing at an aircraft traveling at 540 knots from a standing start was like attempting to hit a bullet with a rock. The missile corkscrewed into a field as soon as it became foolish. The pilot checked his 6, while banking hard around a radio tower. It was clean for the moment, but more smoke trails were rising from spots he had just passed. They were calling ahead, directing all air defense resources in the direction of his likely path. Like he had just kicked an anthill, the entire occupied territory was awakening. His SPO-15 threat receiver began to chirp. Search radars are painting him and attempting to create a track as they come online. Every SAM system within 50 miles would be aware of his precise location in a matter of minutes. But first, a second manpads team materialized on a factory roof. and he had to make it through the next 30 seconds. He had no room to maneuver between the power lines, and the missile was already ahead of the train. He was pushed up to 200 feet by the industrial roof. Exposure to danger is preferable to ingesting a rocket. The SPO-15 danger display burst with contacts right away. He is being painted across several frequency bands by several radar devices. Every spike signifies a distinct danger. The Pantsir's lone RS-2E radar was attempting to lock him down for a shot by alternating between track mode at 20 kilometers and search mode with its 40-kilometer range umbrella. The search mode resembled a lighthouse that swept across the area. Track mode is similar to having a spotlight locked on. He would have seconds before the missile launched as soon as it switched to track. The pilot turned perpendicular to the Pantsir's radar beam and performed a notch filter maneuver. However, your signature matches ground clutter while you are moving sideways with respect to Doppler radar. You practically blend into the backdrop. Sound. However, this required him to take a different route, travel more miles, and use more fuel than he could afford. Every defensive move involved a trade-off between having enough petrol to get home and surviving the next threat. The Russians were laying up a traditional SAM trap, while the pilot was attempting to dip, duck, dive, and avoid missiles. He would be eliminated by the outdated P-18 VHF radar. Its extended wavelengths penetrate difficult-to-hide terrain. The X-band fire control radars would then activate. It's similar to sending in attack dogs for the final blow after deploying a tracking dog to locate someone. A Tor M2 system is warming up after a frigid start in the meantime. The 9A331 electrically guided array of these devices takes 3 full minutes to boot up. It could engage 4 targets at once and track 48 targets concurrently once it was online. In less than 2 minutes, he would be flying straight into its engagement envelope. The Kasuka-4 electronic warfare system joined the fray, starting GPS jamming across the L1 and L2 bands at 1575 and 1227 MHz. As if things weren't already dire enough. The pilot saw the 8 satellites on his GPS device flash down to 5, then 4. For the JDAM to have a circular error probability of fewer than 5 meters, 8 satellites were required for maximum precision. The distance between hitting the building and the parking lot might increase to 30 meters with just 4 satellites. However, Ukrainian engineers had foreseen Russian electronic warfare strategies. Ring laser gyroscopes were used to improve the inertial navigation system of their modified JDAM-ER. It could retain 10 mm accuracy for 2 minutes, even in the absence of a GPS, essentially calculating every minute since and recalling precisely where it began. It's time to inspect the weapon. The pilot moved to a bit built-in test for his store management system. Data passed through the Ukrainian modified pylons interface. This was not meant to be successful. Soviet aircraft were equipped with American armaments, but Ukrainian engineers had essentially hot-wired a USB link between incompatible systems. GPS data was transferred, providing the bomb with the current locations of each satellite. The INS gyroscope whirled. The battery lasted for 27 minutes, yet a 40-mile glide with full green lights only took 90 seconds. 3 switch throws were required to program the backup impact mode. The JDAM would only employ inertial navigation and barometric pressure if GPS failed entirely. Though less precise, it's still preferable to nothing. He modified the release settings to account for atmospheric conditions. At altitude, the headwind is 5 knots, the temperature is normal, and the pressure is 2992. All of this would be taken into account by the bomb's computer when calculating its glide route. 30 seconds after the starting point. He became devoted after this. Abortion is not an option. In 45 seconds, the Tor M2 would be completely online. He would need to release the weapon, crawl into its engagement envelope, and somehow make it through the escape. After taking a deep breath, the pilot checked that he had 48 flares left and got ready to aim his plane at the sky. The whole Russian air defense network was coming online behind him. Missiles were spinning up, radars sweeping, and all eyes were on one Ukrainian MiG that was going to spoil their morning. Like a sledgehammer, the first point struck the jet. As the MiG's nose became vertical, the pilot crushed himself with 5 Gs by pulling the stick into his stomach. With their afterburner fully engaged, the dual RD-33 engines roared. The fighter becomes a rocket with 36,600 lb of combined thrust. The airplane started off climbing at a speed of 280 meters per second. The altimeter is whirling like a slot machine. This was the high-speed yo-yo profile, using momentum to ascend the first large hill, while turning 540 knots of forward speed into altitude like a roller coaster. The probing, weeping cry of the SPO-15's oral warning has given way to the firm tone that every fighter pilot dreads. Despite the MiG's nearly vertical altitude of 13,000 feet and 220 knots, the Russian operator performed admirably, maintaining the lock. At 14,000 feet and 200 knots, the stall warning system began to chirp as they approached the edge of regulated flight. Nearly there, the pilot pickled the JDAM at precisely 15,000 feet and 185 knots. 28 bolts were dispatched to the pylon via the store's management system by the pickle button. He could feel the unique thump of explosive bolts firing through the airframe. The 500-pound explosive first tumbled and dropped away. The flight control computer then took over once the GPS receiver acquired satellites. With a burst of white smoke, gas generators launched the diamond-shaped wings. The missile started its 40-mile glide right away in the direction of the grain elevator, where Russian drone operators were carrying out their morning attacks against KISS. However, the pilot was still unable to rejoice. For a clean separation, he required 2 more seconds of steady flight. With a rocket closing at twice the speed of sound, those 2 seconds seemed like hours. 1001 and 1002 separations verified. He was able to fight now. He dove hard back toward Earth after rolling inverted and pulling through into an S-split defense. A cloud of radar-reflective aluminum strips spanning 100 meters was created when 6 B-chaff cartridges exploded from the dispensers. Up until the terminal phase, the 9 M331 missiles were guided by command. To steer, the ground radar had to keep its lock. A Doppler notch was produced by the pilot's abrupt drop. He disappears like a ghost from their screen as his radio velocity in relation to the radar approaches 0. The Russian operator tried to manually steer the missile through the chaff using a TV camera by switching to his optical backup channel, but it was like playing the deadliest video game in the world with a huge lag as someone hurled tinfoil at your screen. Perfectly timing his drop, the pilot placed the missile above him at 500 meters when its proximity fuse went off. The weapon exploded 300 meters distant. The warhead was so close that pieces of tungsten were thrown around. One piece made the sound of a hammer striking a bell as it punched through the port engine compressor portion. The temperature of the exhaust gas instantly jumped into the red. The pilot completely stopped the injured engine after throttling it back to idle. The fire warning light remained off. Fortunately, he lost half of his thrust 40 meters behind German lines. Engineers who created the MiG-29 believed that everything would eventually malfunction. Flying with just one engine was totally feasible, but it wasn't the best option when everyone was attempting to kill you. The entire city exploded when the MiG screamed over Hola Pristan at 800 feet. All of the Cu-23 anti-aircraft positions opened at the same time. Each of the 2 23mm autocannons can fire 950 rounds per minute. Instead of shooting for the plane's location, the Russians used the barrage firing tactic to build steel walls where they thought it would be. It's similar to shooting skiing, but the clay pigeon is moving at 500 knots while actively attempting to survive. There was a tracer every 5th round. They resemble the laser effects from the Star Wars films. In actuality, however, they would indicate that a missile larger than your thumb is screaming at you at double the speed of sound. An ambush flak trap had been set up by the Russians. who held fire until he was committed to his escape route and had nowhere to go. Excellent tactical reasoning. The pilot did, however, have one advantage. Through his own sonic boom, he was soaring. Everything shimmered like a desert mirage as the overpressure wave interfered with optical perception. Gunners were attempting to aim through air that was continuously warping. They were making poor shots. Then, in order to get around tracking solutions, he began jinking 2 3G spins at random every 2 seconds. This would be standard on 2 engines. It was like attempting to perform surgery while riding a mechanical bull on 1 engine, with deteriorating hydraulics. Since the shrapnel struck, the yellow hydraulic warning light has been on. It turned crimson now. Primary failure of the hydraulic system. Although it only offered 30% control authority, the backup system activated automatically. Massive stick and rudder movement was now necessary for every control input. Every motion became 10 times more difficult. Rounds measuring 23mm began to join. The cockpit was filled with the unique sound of metal smashing through aluminum skin. The pilot used differential propulsion and rudder to compensate. He just had 1 engine, though. Every system malfunction led to further issues. With every strike, the aircraft was getting more difficult to manage. He could see about 35 miles of Ukrainian territory ahead through the confusion. Because Soviet engineers created devices similar to flying tanks, the MiG continued to fly even though it was hardly reacting to inputs. The pilot was able to fly with half of the aircraft shot away because of triple redundancy in everything. The JDAM-ER was in its terminal dive at 287 ms, 40 miles behind him. There were only 3 seconds left for the drone operators in the grain elevator to escape. The FMU-152 joint programmable fuse on the weapon was in delay mode. Before exploding, it would pierce deeply. At more than 600 miles per hour, the bomb struck the center support column. It punched through it like paper, then through 2 additional steel and concrete floors. After that, it exploded. In microseconds, 445 pounds of conventional 80% TNT with 20% aluminum powder were transformed into pure energy. At a radius of 10 meters, the explosion overpressure reached 300 psi. Everything was instantaneously devoured by the 2,800-degree flame that the aluminum powder produced. Faster than a rifle bullet, the blast wave passed through the concrete at 1,100 barrages, causing spalling where the concrete turned into deadly missiles. The column of support evaporated. Grain and 8,000 tons of concrete started to gradually crumble. Gravitational acceleration causes each floor to pound the one beneath it. Like a Jenga tower, the structure collapsed in on itself. Just 6.2 seconds was the total collapse time. From Ukrainian positions across the river, the dust cloud soared to a height of 500 feet. As drone batteries and cached Igla missiles burnt off, their warheads added to the devastation, causing secondary explosions to reverberate throughout the ruins. The Ukrainian pilot battled failing hydraulics every meter, while nursing his wounded MiG toward friendly airspace while maintaining a minimal controllable airspeed on 1 engine. The Russian drone headquarters had vanished behind him. At last, the hunters had turned into the hunted. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe to my channel, WW2 Revealed, for more incredible stories and untold moments from history.